What's up, guys? My name is Zach, and today I am driving a 1984 Lincoln Continental. Up front is a 2.4 liter diesel straight six, and down below is a 4-speed automatic transmission. Now, I am super excited to be driving this Continental for two major reasons. First of all, I haven't driven a Continental of this generation. This is the 7th generation Continental. But the second reason, and the more important reason, is the fact that this is a diesel, and it is a BMW diesel from the factory. So we have a lot to talk about here today in this video, but if you would like to share your cool and interesting car with me, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form, takes under a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. But let's get back to that diesel engine under the hood. Well, there's actually a pretty interesting story that goes along with it. Why the heck this has a BMW diesel under the hood? So let's get into that. Well, to accurately understand it, we have to go back to the 1970s with the oil crisis. Across the globe, there was an oil crisis due to frustration and political strife in the Middle East. So oil was cut off from a lot of parts of the world. This put car makers into panic mode, and across the 70s and into the 80s, we saw a mass change in automobiles. There was a push now for efficiency as well as emission testing on vehicles. And so companies were trying a bunch of different things. GM was prototyping a rotary engine, but Cadillac started experimenting with diesel engines in their sedans, most popularly the DeVille, a luxury sedan with a diesel engine. They thought maybe that could be the answer to the fuel crisis. And so when Cadillac did that, Lincoln across the table said, hey, I want to do that too. But instead of putting the research and spending the money trying to develop a new diesel engine for their sedans, they went over to their headquarters in Cologne, Germany, walked down the street and knocked on the door of their neighbor's BMW and said, hey, we want a diesel car. Can we buy your engines for our new Continental? And BMW said, sure, why not? And so that's how this car came to be, which actually ended up being really smart on Lincoln's part, because the diesel Cadillac were touted as some of the worst vehicles ever made. They're loud, they're clangy, they're slow, and people hated them. People also hated this car, but Lincoln didn't have that much money set into it, at least not as much as GM did. So they made out a little bit better than their neighbors. But let's get back to it. It's a 2.4 liter straight six turbo diesel, and it makes a whopping 114 horsepower. And let me tell you, you feel it. I'm matted right now, and I'm doing 33, 34, 35 the speed limit. Jeez. This thing is pitifully slow, and that was the biggest complaint across the board with these engines. Now, like I said, paired to it is a 4-speed automatic. The interesting thing is that this actually gets a different 4-speed than what the regular gasoline Continentals got. Both transmissions had 4 gears, but this is actually a German ZF transmission, where the regular Continentals just got the standard Ford AOD transmission. So is, whatever off the shelf. This actually got the German transmission to go with that German engine. Last but not least, of course, the Continental is rear-wheel drive. So how does it feel to actually drive a diesel Continental, something so rare? Because they only made about 1,500 of these in 1984, and they canceled it for 1985. Well, it's big and floaty in terms of like suspension, but in actual driving practice, it's pretty god-awful. I'm genuinely struggling to keep up with modern traffic, or just anyone at all. You think older Continentals are lumpy and lazy. This Continental's been given a sedative. With all the poking and prodding in the world, I cannot get this thing to accelerate at a decent pace. It is dreadful. But to me, that is super cool, and I love it with my whole itty-bitty heart. So with that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I get digital gauges, a very, very nice touch. I get my fuel gallons off to the left, speed in the center, odometer off to the right. I do also get some physical pieces like the gear select and fasten seatbelts light. On the steering wheel, I have very low slung grips for the steering wheel, but I do have cruise control options down below as well. So, very nice feature for 1984. Off to the left, I do have a climate control vent, as well as all my headlight, other light options on a little control panel. Then moving on to the door, we do have our latch to get in and out, which the finish panel has since left the chat. And then we have our power mirrors and power window switches. However, what's very interesting is that I actually have a power smoker's window up at the front that opens independently of the rest of the window. Very, very cool and very retro, which I, of course, really love. Moving into the center, I get a giant, well, the buttons are giant information center, but the actual screen is tiny. So I have clock, alarm, estimated time, ETA, destination, distance, average speed, fuel economy, DTE, whatever that means, set, miles, and reset. Pretty interesting stuff there. Then I have my quote-unquote idiot lights, my warning lights, which I don't know why in the 80s and 90s it was a big deal to leave the outlines of the lights, but you can't openly tell what they mean unless they illuminate. Kind of an interesting style choice, but you see it across all American cars of this era. Then we do have the premium sound, but still Ford labeled radio. Very, very interesting there, and I do have a cassette player, which is fun. And then we have our electronic climate controls down below. So I get cool and warm, and then my options of where to send it and fan speed. Very, very basic here. And then, of course, I do have my cigarette lighter and my ashtray. Then we have an open area, and we come up to the seats. The seats are very, very comfortable. Exactly what you would expect out of a Lincoln product from this era. Cushy, bouncy, and exactly what I want in my living room whenever I have guests over. It's a very, very pleasurable experience and what I expect out of the Lincoln Auto Group. The seat controls are also found in this little middle area, which is very, very interesting. And they are power seats, which is a very nice feature for an 80s car. However, in this area, you won't find any cup holders. So unfortunately, by default, the 1984 diesel Continental fails the big friggin' bottle test. But speaking of seats, we do have back seats, so let's go do a back seat review. Well, I never thought I'd see the day, but I am squeezed in the back of this Lincoln Continental. These seats are reclined a pretty fair amount, I will say. I could be nicer with giving myself room, but it's still not fantastic. This is where you really notice the downsizing that occurred in the late 70s and early 80s. But I digress. Also, this headliner is sagging, which is making me feel a little bit more claustrophobic, but happens to pretty much all cars from this era. The seats are definitely very cushy. I do get a center console, just a big foam brick back here. And I do get these little opera lights back here over my shoulder. I have the nice wood paneling on the doors as well. Nothing really to write home about besides that. Let's hop out. We'll take a quick look at the trunk and cargo space, and then we'll talk about the looks. All right, so we're on the back of the diesel Continental. It's really cool. You get a little diesel badge right there, but a lot of cars in the era hide the keyhole behind one of these badges, and the Lincoln is no different. Round key for the trunk. Oh. You can see it doing like a little soft opening thing. Then we do have the trunk of the Continental. It is huge, it is large and in charge, and I think I could probably rent this out on Airbnb if I really wanted to. Of course, you do get a spare tire, although it doesn't go where the trunk would suggest that it goes. It actually just goes in the back, so kind of funny there. Other than that, nothing too crazy to write home about, but that is the trunk of a diesel Continental. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and I could honestly give or take this era of Continentals. These were a lot smaller than the Continentals that came before them, and the Continentals that came after this were smaller than this. This is the start of the downsizing in American vehicles. About 1977, 1978, 1979, all three big American automakers started downsizing their vehicles. People wanted smaller, more efficient vehicles, and so we see that just in physical stature of the cars of the era. Park this next to the Lincoln Continental from 1979, and you'll start to see the differences right away. However, with all of that being said, let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving a diesel Lincoln Continental? Well, I would be remiss if I also grazed over one other really cool part of this car, and that is that it is a Valentino edition. So in the early 80s and throughout the 80s and even later on, I'll explain in a second, Ford was doing these collabs with designers. This was the Valentino edition, which got some fun and interesting stylistic choices from the Valentino company. And so that makes this car even more rare, but it's similar to what Ford did in the early 2000s with the Eddie Bauer edition, the Harley Davidson editions. Think of like stuff like that. So definitely a cool extra feature that I don't really notice while driving around, but something to note. But what are my genuine final thoughts on driving this car around? Or this automotive jar of molasses, this automotive sloth, this automotive suburban dad choosing which draft beer he wants on a Friday night? Just pick one! Just pick one! It doesn't matter! Just pick one off the menu! I feel like I have to plead with this car. Just go! Just go forward, please. I'm just asking you to do 25 miles an hour, please. This car is, well, in a word, awful. It's loud and clangy. Listen to this diesel engine just standing next to it. Not quite what I want out of my big luxury sedan. The acceleration is pitiful. I won't harp on it much longer. The actual interior is actually very spacious, very comfortable, decently well equipped for, you know, what it is. But man, this was not the answer to the oil crisis. Lincoln and Cadillac across the table got it very, very wrong. Diesel engines were not the solution to their problems. And so consequently, Lincoln found that out very quickly. Almost no one got the diesel version. And this era of cars, this and its Cadillac counterpart, are the reason today of why Americans hate diesel cars. Because this is what we were given in the 80s. They're loud and clangy and slow and stupid and awful. But modern diesels are actually so good and amazing. But we just can't shake this out of our heads. But to me, I think this is one of the coolest gosh darn cars in the whole wide world. I love how weird and quirky and forgotten and awful this car is. I love that it's terrible to drive because I love how unique and interesting this is. I've driven 100 Camrys, I've driven 100 Civics, I've driven 100 whatever cookie cutter car you want to fill in the blanks with, but I've never driven something like this. This is so special and unique and just an absolute monument to what the heck was going on in the 1980s. We had no idea how to handle the emissions and fuel crisis. And so, this is just an attempt. This car is a rough draft. And it's a rough draft that they didn't go forward with, which I have to say, thank God they didn't. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to John for letting me take out his diesel Continental, as well as Matt, of course, for being the liaison and setting this review up. This is such a unique piece of history, and if nothing else, I hope you at least learned a little something about a BMW engine coming in a Lincoln from the factory. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe. If you really liked it, I'm going to end this video with a poll. This is foot flat on the floor. Ugh. Take care, guys.